This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com and constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and it's my job to help you maximize profit and eliminate chaos in your construction business. I've got an interesting podcast for you today. We have two parts. The first is an interview with a couple of guys who have spent the last year and a half or so working on one of the largest projects, one of the largest commercial projects in the country. It's the Chicago Post Office project. And here's what you're going to get from this first part. You're going to hear about some of the biggest challenges that the team faced on this extremely large, extremely complex renovation project. You'll hear about some of the most interesting technology solutions out there for contractors. You'll hear from some guys who have made some mistakes that they've run into, and they'll answer the question, what's the biggest mistake to avoid when trying to roll out a new piece of software? And you'll find out what they would do if they had it to do all over again. They're going to talk about how they used Fieldwire on this project and some of the benefits that they got out of that piece of software. And there's a couple of interesting concepts, 3 interesting concepts to listen for. One is herd knowledge. Number 2 is training fatigue. And then number 3 is the habits, or the importance of habits versus attitudes when it comes to rolling out solutions. And then in the second part, I had an opportunity to sit down with the CEO and founder of Fieldwire, Yves Freneau, and we talk about a few things that were particularly interesting. Number 1 is, I asked him a few questions. Number 1, what's the biggest mistake contractors make when trying to roll out a new system, software, or process, ultimately trying to change behavior? I also asked, how should somebody go about selling upper management or ownership on the idea of changing a process? And then, what are some of the biggest problems or challenges that contractors are facing that Yves and his team there at Fieldwire are tackling? So, really good stuff. You're going to get a lot out of this podcast. So we're going to jump into it. Let's get right to that interview with Nick and Tony from Bear Construction. And they're going to give a deep dive and a behind-the-scenes look of one of the biggest commercial construction projects going on in the country right now. Enjoy. All right. So I'm here with Nick and Tony from Bear Construction. And we're going to talk about common mistakes when it comes to rolling out technology. We're going to talk about a pretty cool, really large project. But before we get into that, I'll just let you guys introduce yourselves. Tony, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then Nick, you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Tony Gloria. I'm the field technology manager for Bear Construction. My job, I like to say it's playing with toys and gadgets, but really what it comes down to is researching and implementing new technologies or existing technologies and finding the best way to not only fit them into the construction industry, but even ways to better utilize them in ways to fill the needs that we have or to increase efficiency and communications.
Very cool. And Nick, how about you?
Nick Wienold. I am an assistant project manager here at the Chicago Post Office group we got set up. I support multiple senior executive project managers up the chain in executing and planning just day-to-day activities and getting the job done as painless as possible with as few hiccups and on time. So yeah, just working through submittals, RFIs, the design team, and working with the subcontractors to make sure they got everything lined up to just fit right in to where they're supposed to.
Gotcha. And big projects like that, in my experience, are always just super smooth, and they just practically run themselves. No changes, especially renovations of historic buildings. No changes. It all just takes care of itself, right?
Yeah, it just flows right in there.
Well, maybe all the other ones, I don't know, we've run into a couple. We like to think we do a pretty darn good job, but there's always, that's really our job here at Bear Construction, as a general contractor, is to mitigate those issues as much as possible. And I think we do a pretty darn good job. We've got a great reputation at Bear of working collaboratively with the design teams, with the clients, and all of the subcontractors. And we're pretty well known for a lot of the planning ahead and being ahead of the curve to try and foresee any of those issues to minimize them as much as possible.
Excellent. Yeah, and the thing is about a good project management team is if you do your job well, it looks like you didn't do anything. It just looks like it runs so smoothly. But I know better than that. I know that it's like a duck paddling. Everything looks nice and calm above the water, but they're paddling like hell below the water, behind the scenes. So let's talk about this project that you guys are working on. First of all, how many people on the Bear team are working on this project?
On the PM side, I think we counted up around like 12 to 14 from executive, vice president, executive, senior project manager, all the way down to interns. We've had 3 of them roll through here. So we got a pretty robust project management staff kind of tackling different portions of the job, what we refer to as bid packages at the post office. It was contracted and split out over years throughout here. So everybody kind of has their piece of the pie, as well as working together to fit those together. And then we have 6 currently superintendents and 1 senior superintendent kind of overseeing everything, and a couple foremen for we are a self-performing labor and carpentry contractor.
Gotcha.
One of the things, what was the most amount of contractors and people we had through here at one point? I think we spoke about that.
I think before. In 24 hours it was like 250, 300. So a lot of field staff rolling in and out, but that's between subcontractors, ourselves, everybody else.
A lot of people. So let's talk about this project. Give us an idea. Well, what's the name of this project, and then what's the ballpark total cost of this project, and what are you doing? Yeah,
so the old Chicago post office is a massive archway heading into the city. You actually, when you drive through on Highway 290, you drive right through the center of the building. It's a 2.7 million square foot building that operated as the largest mail distribution center at the time that it was built, which was around 1920s, and then an expansion later in the 1930s. So this operated to really send mail in and out. The Sears catalog, Chicago was really the shipping hub of the U.S. at the time. I think President Roosevelt actually came through and when it first opened to really display just the grandiose nature of it. There's giant 30-foot tall ceilings, this historic marble in the lobby. It just beautiful architecture, really well done. Same architects who built places or designed places like the Merchandise Mart and various other buildings around Chicago. But over time, the post office kind of outgrew the old Chicago post office building. It just didn't function well, didn't make sense. It wasn't as upkept as it should have been. And eventually, building maintenance and fire on the 7th floor led to the Chicago or the post office erecting a new building directly across the street. And they moved there sometime in the somewhere between the 80s and 90s. I can't remember exactly when, but at that point, the building kind of went through a couple different phases of disarray, and there were quite a few hatched plans to try to turn it into a skyscraper, different things, just switched hands a few times as far as ownership goes, but eventually landed in 601 West Company's hands. They own other buildings like the Aon Center, and they partnered with Bear from our past projects and JLL as the project managers or property manager to execute the renovation of the old Chicago post office. So that was a 5-year plan that was above $500 million in total renovations, and it keeps expanding, growing different arms as the building really changed forms and started to appear in its in its final use phases, there's always add-ons and little changes that people want to make.
And the current, the renovation, the idea is now that the building will be transformed into definitely not a post office. It's being transformed into mainly corporate headquarters. There's some dining that's going to kind of revitalize the Chicago Riverway that goes just along the old Chicago post office here. So there will be kind of a causeway that links up to us here. A beautiful rooftop deck that's really neat with basketball courts and a bar, a running track. So really turning this from what was turning into a decrepit old building into a beautiful piece of architecture that is now housing some big name brands and a modernized kind of work facility.
Very cool. And total project cost somewhere north of $500 million. And approximately how long is it going to take from, I know these things take a while even after they're, quote, finished, but is this a 4-year project, 5-year project, 12-year project? Give me an idea of how long it has taken.
We've been on site. We actually walked with ownership when they first looked at purchasing the building, kind of walked through in its decrepit state. And so we've been on the ground, boots on the ground since the start. But I think really the demolition phases, abatement, and some of the initial MEP and just like contracting started to occur around 2015, 2016. And it's still rolling today. In about a year, the vast majority of build-outs and kind of building upgrades should be complete. But yeah, it's always a quote finished because it's all relative.
And of course, that's the main part of the renovation, and some of the clients and their offices that have moved in now. If I'm not mistaken, we're still far away from the building being filled up.
It is leased out pretty substantially, I think above 90%. But as far as occupancy in those spaces go, they're still working. Yeah, I'm getting those numbers up. We did a lot of the white box build outs, and then other contractors have won bids for build outs as Walgreens, Uber, so like other general contractors are in here partnering with those companies to build out their spaces. But
yeah, so 5-6 year project, over $500 million, 200 to 250 workers on site at any one point. Lots of complexity, but I'm curious, what are some of the biggest challenges that your team dealt with on this specific project, whether it was constructability, managing people, finding people, what were the biggest challenges?
Biggest challenges really were just the scale of this building. Logistics, it's a skyscraper turned on its side. It's half the size of the Sears Tower, but it makes it up in 10 stories rather than 114, I think the Sears is. So I would say vertical transportation, because you had to rebuild a lot of these old elevators that were in here. So a lot of new elevators are going in steel. Those were some of the early jobs that we were working on. But during that time, you still needed quite a bit of vertical transportation for material and manpower. So that was a big obstacle to overcome. And then we do have a highway running through it. And then on the opposite direction, the building is really built on stilts over the Amtrak platforms. So all of the southbound trains run and dock in for Union Station directly below the post office. So diesel exhaust comes up, gets caught in what we refer to as the plenum, that's kind of suspended underneath the first floor deck, and then sucked up through various exhaust chutes up and out through massive fans on the different pylon and roof levels. So dealing with government entities like that, Amtrak you don't just tell them what you're doing. It's hard to schedule and execute, especially when you got as much plumbing and mechanical work as we had to renovate on this place.
Yeah, and that was a lot of the initial challenges that obviously went through a lot of the project, but then a lot of the ongoing challenges were, as we said, this is a historic building.
Yes.
Like Nick mentioned earlier, with a lot of the marble, gold inlay in the lobby, original, 1-ton light fixtures that are hoisted up from the third floor. So sourcing a lot of those items, matching the colors. Nick, I know we talked about like matching the marble color because the quarry that it comes from, well, it changes over 70 years. So matching that color is always an issue.
Yeah, it's a natural product. So yeah, as you go through the quarry, the hues and tones changes. It's cooler, lighter, darker. So really finding and sourcing these materials was a massive challenge. There were unbelievable lead times that we had to overcome to really execute a schedule anywhere near what was initially planned for. We sourced gold tiles that Tony's referring to from Italy. Made with real gold leaf, had to be shipped over. And if you don't get it in before their holiday season, you're off an extra month. But things like that, there were if you walk into like kind of the northwest corner of the building, there's these green and black tiles, mosaic tiles that are on the floor. And they look simple enough to reproduce, but they actually really could only be reproduced by one company that we were able to find out of Alabama. And it was the specific dirt they were using. They had to use an old school wood fire process for actually baking these. And just trying to recreate the way that people did things 100 years ago when they installed these and have it match and look presentable, especially to the high trafficked areas like the lobbies and the historic Grand Corridor. Those were significant challenges for sourcing.
So I'm curious with even with relatively simple products these days, quality is an issue, and getting a quality installation is a challenge even with drywall, in my experience, or an acoustic ceiling. I'm curious, how did you guys manage and deal with the question of how are we going to, all right, we found the products, but how do we actually get this marble or these really specialty historic type products? How do we get them installed to the right quality? How did you guys figure that out?
You use the right contractors. And I think anybody who's worked in the business knows that. I mean, if you pay a sub-rate contractor, you're going to get a sub-rate product. So really trying to find that balance in even out of the limited pool to get these materials from, just finding people that we had good relationships with. Hard Surface, for example, did a lot of our stonework here, and they do a lot of plaza work around Chicago. They're really good at what they do on that. So relying on them and then on the design teams to really verify a lot of these items was key in executing it. It's general contracting is a tricky game, but as long as you got good partners like that, it's very helpful. And of course, ownership was flexible on trying to achieve the goal and meet all the requirements. But yeah, I would say just having the right people.
Yeah, and one of the things with a great sub is, and we're lucky enough, of course, in the Chicago area, there is a relatively large pool to choose from at first. But then when you start narrowing down somebody who's not only capable of doing the type of work that is necessary here, but are they able to scale up to the magnitude, again, of this building? You might have a guy who's, a business who's one of the best stone workers, but if they're not able to scale to meet the needs of this project, then unfortunately, that's just not going to work for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was an example of a trade that was a challenge to scale up?
I would say we did actually run into manpower issues with plumbing at one point. There was nobody left in the hall, just dry. Another one, and that's just, there was so much demand for this work around this time in Chicago that you're really limited on that resource, more or less. But another one would be ornamental ironwork. That was very difficult to do. A lot of these are cast chevron and shark tooth pieces around the building. If you walk around the perimeter, there's quite a bit of intricate design. So taking those down, getting them casted, and our contractor who did all that work with us was actually out of Alabama. So we had to pretty continuously check in with them, and things just run different pace. I've talked to a lot of people in the construction industries around the U.S., and a lot of times people will just tell you that Chicago runs on a motor that is up. I mean, it's in the top 3 for sure. I've heard New York is pretty grueling for timelines and demands, but Chicago's right up there. So when you're not living in the city timeline's a little hard to enforce sometimes.
And a lot of credit, I think, to our estimators, our estimating team. We at Bear, we do have an in-house estimating team, which we believe one of the best around. And they do a lot of the sourcing for these subcontractors and making the subcontractor decisions and finding the best fit for the need and making sure they can meet the timelines. And they have these, not only the manpower, but the scheduling capabilities, and, they're able to dedicate themselves to the work to meet the timeline. And not only on their, for their work, but because there's so many different things going on at one time in the building, being able to coordinate and work with all the different work that's happening at one time.
What's the longest lead time for a material that you had to deal with?
Those glass tiles, maybe?
Yeah, the mosaic tiles were pretty up there. I mean, I'd say 20 weeks. 20 weeks. But we had to pay some expediting fees to even get some of those right around there. So I would say 20 weeks. And that's not taken into consideration. Maybe there's larger items like generators and stuff that maybe I didn't have a direct involvement with. But yeah, definitely from an architectural standpoint, 20 weeks. So it's a long time to wait. That's a big one. So I appreciate you guys going into details on that. That's a fascinating project.
Let's talk about technology. You guys, we're going to talk about some specific technology that you use, but you guys are pretty dialed into construction technology. What are some of the most interesting tech solutions out there right now for contractors, in your opinion?
Yeah, there's some new tech that we've been bringing in here, as well as kind of repurposing, let's say, some old technologies that you can find fits for to make them seem new or to kind of revitalize the way we work. A couple of the new things that we're using that actually we were going through the post office here today was the 3D cameras with 360 view and 3D depth data built in. These allow us to take not only high resolution photography, but we can pull cloud point data to do precise measurements of an area. We can create what's best referred to as like a Google Street View type walkthrough of a space. This is something that we can use throughout the construction process, starting even with the demo phase to get an initial idea of the sizing of a space, be able to send that out to, through our subcontractor line so they can get proper bids in. Going on through, just some time lapse for, let's say, marketing purposes, being able to see the job progress in really what used to be considered an unprecedented type of view, but what now just looks like kind of the future of how you're going to look at an open space. It's able to be viewed on a virtual reality headset, which a couple of uses there, obviously, again, with the marketing for things like trade shows, great to show off a project. But especially right now, with the way the world is right now, being able to give a client a view of their job site as it's progressing without them having to step foot on the project. A picture says 1,000 words, but being able to walk through that space and move your head in a VR headset to look closer at a specific part of the project and walk through that project is something that at least right now really wows the client and makes our job, it really brings it to a new level as far as the views you can get from it. So that 3D camera is something we've been really excited about.
Yeah, we utilized some other technologies here. We've used BIM 360 glue. So that was a Matterport camera, the 360 camera. And then we use BIM 360 glue, especially. That was one of the coolest technologies to use specifically for this project too, because being so massive, you have this huge duct runs, these high ceilings, and you're really trying to maintain the design intent, whether it's this building or another building, and being able to run through with ownership and architects before anything shows up on site and work through. There's deep transfer beams where this building crosses over the highway. So adjusting a run of duct 2 bays over and making some compromise on how these boots look and things like that, we're able to better execute the vision for the space ahead of time, and really, most importantly, at no cost to the ownership, given that it was in before fabrication happened. So technology, just BIM, Revit, all these online platforms, kind of viewing, modeling. But one of the most useful technologies that really started kind of the technological wave through all our subcontractors that were followed by things like this and submittal exchange for submittals, RFIs, tracking purposes was Fieldwire. So we utilized Fieldwire, which is an online cloud-hosted plan software, and then they've also expanded into other things. We've been using it for our punch list phases here, as well as kind of just document storage after it moves through the phases and we get all the answers, just so the subcontractors always have it in one single location. So yeah, Fieldwire was, I'd say, the most useful that we've run into here.
Yeah, Fieldwire is one of the most beloved technologies that we use at Bear. We use it very, very widely. Goes from our project management team to the field, our superintendents, onto the subcontractors, and even the clients, can have access to it. So again, they can have a more transparency on the job and the status of the job site. And then really tying in some of the technologies with Fieldwire, things like our field workstations, which are secured gang boxes with, we install a 32-inch TV in there with a PC, a webcam, speaker system, everything. And Fieldwire is really the core component of that system, as it allows the superintendent to have obviously a larger view, always up to date, the most up-to-date plans, markups, photos, things like that. They can host subcontractor meetings on site using that screen. Here at the post office, we have a 55-inch 4K touchscreen that, again, Fieldwire is the core of this system, where we'll have 20 people in a room doing a conference, going over the next phase of plans, whatever it may be, and we're able to do digital markups on this large display. And all those markups, as they're being done in this conference, they're immediately then synchronized with all the guys in the field who are using their tablets. So utilizing known technology like tablets, like the touchscreens, things like that, but then software like Fieldwire is really taking that technology and making it so much more useful, so much more collaborative, and just increasing the workflow, streamlining the workflow, increasing efficiency. And it's probably helped. It's hard to quantify, but reducing the amount of questions and errors and misconceptions maybe that
document control. Just document control. As somebody who's been in the project management role, that's a fundamental portion of project management. And it's not a heralded portion of it, but you have to have that under control to be able to execute a project properly. And something like Fieldwire allows a redaction of an old plan, an old ASK, what we just refer to as rogue documents, sketches that somebody came up with in getting to the final solution, but then you don't ever get to the final solution. And being able to, when you upload a new plan to Fieldwire, it layers over the old plan. So as you get a new bulletin, addendum, any of those things, an ESK, an SSK, it goes directly into the plan sheet where you can you can compare to the old documents as well as reference the newest one to make sure that anybody looking at it knows they're looking at the newest document.
Yeah, that's huge. I know from my experience, having been an owner's rep on some pretty large projects, one of my questions was, all right, what are we building? We're on a fast track project. What's our contract tied to? And in many cases, you tie everybody to a set of drawings and set of documents at a certain date, and then you just keep drawing and things keep changing. And okay, what are we tied to? And then what are we building from? And in my experience, there's a lot of what I call profit bleeds, from poor document control. It's because people are working from an old set. They fabricate ductwork from the set that came out last week and it just changed. And then you catch somebody, wait, that's changing. There's this constant churn of changes. And yeah, the closer to real time you can have in the distribution of those updated drawings, it's an absolute game changer. I frankly, I don't know how a big project like that could have been done 20 years ago when it's all, here's a new set of plans. Yeah. You just paid a lot more money. You just got out your checkbook. Yeah. So let's talk about implementing, rolling out, and getting people sold on changing systems like this and investing in systems. So let's start with the biggest mistake that people need to avoid when trying to roll out a new piece of software like Fieldwire. Could be something else, not specifically Fieldwire, but in your opinion, maybe these are some mistakes that you made or some mistakes you guys intentionally avoided, but what is the biggest mistake to avoid when trying to roll out a new piece of software like Fieldwire?
I think the first thing you need to do is to be ready. And that's one of the mistakes that is probably pretty common is you see this great piece of software and you look at all the features, you go, wow, this is going to be a game changer. But if you're not ready for implementation, and that could be from a training standpoint, that could be from just a preparedness standpoint. Our people,
if you don't have iPads or Android tablets out there on the job site for people to use this new software that is up to date and compatible, because you're not giving your newest laptop to a superintendent in a wood panel trailer most of the time. So yeah, just making sure these documents work or the softwares work and being prepared is huge.
Yeah, and also training, again, getting your guys ready for the change, especially when it comes to new technology, in the construction industry. Not to say it's an outdated industry, because it is moving with the times, and I think construction technology is very exciting, especially right now. But you do work in an industry where paper plans and markers were basically the bread and butter for all of history, let's say, or for a long time here. So when you're telling people, hey, we're moving to give you this tablet and you're going to have 20 jobs and 10,000 sheets all loaded onto this tablet, first they're of course going to be excited, but there's also going to be a level of anticipation, maybe some confusion. So being prepared for that learning curve, Fieldwire does specifically, let's go back to Fieldwire, they do a great job of putting together things like YouTube videos with tutorials on how to do each section. It's not like a 3-hour training class. No, they have great segmented videos. Hey, I just need to update some plans. How do I do that? So I'll tell you, they actually made the process very easy on the Fieldwire side because they did a lot of the training through things like that. But on our end, preparing guys for using the new technology, giving them an understanding, not only how to use the software, but the hardware. This is all the capabilities. We want you to use it to the extent that the power allows, things like using the stylus on the tablet to do more accurate markups. You don't have to use your finger on the thing, use the pen, just getting them accustomed to what's coming. And as far as the mistakes go, like I say, I think if you start by getting people comfortable with the technology, or at least the foundation of it, it'll be a much easier rollout, and everybody will be a lot more accepting, a lot easier to receive all of that.
So what, now that you guys have gone through this, what would you, if you could do the implementation and the rollout procedure again, what would you do differently if you could go back and do it over again?
I would so we rolled out Fieldwire here. When I got onto the job site, it had already been running for a good year and a half. We had the paper plans. We were a little bit more old school in the fashion of how we were doing it, but we did have these resources and everything else. But when we specifically rolled out Fieldwire, I would have had more support staff here in the first month or so. It was a lot of calls into Tony to get down here, adjust things. For example, our phones didn't have correct SD cards in them, so that we didn't have enough storage on our superintendent's phones, and just the data size of all the files that we were using here were so massive that they weren't able to download them. And if you have a bad rollout in the beginning, people are less likely to be happy about trying it a second time. So really, just having support staff and maybe training a few more people beforehand and having kind of that wealth of information, that it's not just going back to a few central key people. Because once we got, I'd say, like a 30% like herd knowledge on a software, everybody just kind of trains each other of how to improve it. And then you can go through and tackle small issues, updates, or just clarifications on a case-by-case basis, while not just completely shutting down and overriding your current job, which is really to manage the project and be checking in with the architects. If all you're doing is trying to roll out a new software, there's other things you're losing.
Right, and that's one of the key things is that
one thing I want to say about what Nick said, I like that term herd. What did you call it? Herd knowledge?
Yeah.
Where a certain percentage of the people kind of know it, and then it becomes self-sustaining. That's an interesting concept. Sorry, Tony, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No. I think I kind of lost it. We're going to be able to edit this, right?
Yeah. What would you do differently if you could go and roll this out again? If you could go back and do it over again, what would you do differently?
Right. So yeah, as Nick said, a lot of the getting people prepared for it and having the right people that have enough of the knowledge to be able to train everybody else. One of the other things that is specific to more on my side of the project management, let's say, or on the Fieldwire management, as far as technology goes, is really seeing all of the applications that you plan on using as a company, let's say, and trying to reduce a lot of that overlap. Because one of the things we found is, as excited as we are to implement new technologies and to get all the best that we can, you end up with a lot of overlap. Different programs that, okay, this one does a great job at submittals and RFIs, and it also does plan management, but Fieldwire is a lot better at plan management. So we want to make sure we're using Fieldwire for the capabilities that it's doing a better job of. And we ended up, and this is something that we're working through now as a company, is we ended up with several different types of software that some of them did similar things, and that led to some fragmentation amongst the company, where the early adopters of Fieldwire, they got right on it, they love it, and that's what they want to use. Some of the other guys, let's say, that maybe were on the early side with the testing of one of the other softwares, they're a little more fine-tuned in there with that one. And now it's harder to get them to move over because it's like, well, I just learned this system. Now I got to learn a new system that does something similar. It's like, well, yeah, but this one does it better.
Training fatigue is a very, very real thing. And you're already dealing with a lot of headaches when you're working on the job site and executing the project. To introduce a new one on your own accord is really something you don't want to do. So yeah, being precise on what you want people to move to is also very important.
And as Nick kind of touched on, the idea is with all the software, all the technology we're talking about, the idea is to make the job run smoother and more efficiently. If any of this rollout, any of this implementation is going to result in downtime, then we're doing something wrong, because the last thing we can have is, a job slowing down because Nick doesn't know how to use his tablet properly or he's not familiar with the software yet. So that's really something I think that going back again, some of the mistakes, if you could get everybody ready to go, maybe a slower kind of escalated rollout in general of technology, just to get people ready for what's coming.
Would you recommend a scaled back incremental rollout? Like, hey, we're going to use this feature with a certain group of people and then roll it out gradually? Or is it better just to say, you know what, we're going to push you in the pool and you're going to figure it all out at once?
The old sparrow technique. No, I think a testing pool is always really helpful if it's something that you can do. Again, we were definitely really excited for some of the software like Fieldwire, and there were some jobs that, like the old Chicago Post Office, where there was an immediate need for it. I think certain software you can roll out in pieces, let's say, and that is something that we did again, going back to Fieldwire. Not all of, Fieldwire does more than just plan management, but not all at once were all of the different functions utilized, at least not to the full capabilities. We've got a lot of superintendents that started off and a lot of project teams that were using just the plan management side. Hey, we're not going to mess with the RFIs or the punch list or anything on Fieldwire right now. We just want the most up-to-date set of plans on the tablet in the guy's hands. Great, start there. And then as they start becoming more familiar with it, all right, we're going to start using the files function to upload our spec sheets, our spec books, things like that. Now, hey, let's try this punch list. Let's see what that's all about, doing the markup. So more so maybe than a limited pool of people would be maybe a limited, use of the application itself, just to kind of get people comfortable with this section, then move on and kind of get the more powerful aspects used.
So what are some tips for getting people in the field to embrace a new system like this?
I would say it would be habits versus attitudes. And you're not going to change everybody's attitude right away to it. I mean, attitudes are one of the hardest things to really affect. They're dug into ways, and there's good reason people have the attitudes that they have towards technology or a way of doing something. It worked in the past and it worked well. That's why they picked it up. But just getting small habits, getting people in here using this big touch screen. Once somebody was using it and you could be like, oh no, click here, do this. You give a little tip, it suddenly becomes easier and they become more fluid in the program and they go and move with it. So I would say just trying to do small things that get them kind of on board with you, that aren't overly difficult, and kind of leave them on their own. So kind of like a group activity where you can really roll through these things, see the capabilities, see how somebody else flows through a system, and just kind of work with them to adopt a new software.
Yeah, so, I think one of the examples I used to tell the guys was, hey, this is, I'm sorry.
No, I want to go back to the habits. Sorry, Tony, but I want to talk about habits versus attitudes. Nick, how can you help people develop new habits? Have you found any tips, like things that you specifically have done to get people to develop those new habits?
I removed other resources and kind of forced people to it at times. If you just don't order the new plan sets, they have to go on to Fieldwire. I mean, there were people, we kept both going at once, and then you kind of just pull a leg out underneath. We did daily reports. We actually beta tested that for Fieldwire, and for a while people were doing them on Word docs or Excel docs. I mean, every superintendent kind of had a different approach of how he enjoyed doing it. And then eventually we opened those up, and some people adopted using the new software and these autofill forms and things like that. And some people didn't. And we let that run for a while. And then we made it just that you had to go to Fieldwire at a certain point, and that kind of pushed the final bit over. So it's forcing the hand a bit.
Taking options away. Tony, what about you? What tips would you have for getting people to embrace a new system?
Yeah, because my position's more in the office and Nick's more of the hands-on, he's able to to really do it from more of the perspective of the field. One of the things I always thought from day one, looking at things like Fieldwire and some of these other technologies, is you got to make sure everyone understands, hey, this is another tool in your toolbox. This isn't something we're forcing on you that we don't expect you to like, or that we're expecting to make your job harder. This is something we're giving to you to make the job easier for you. It should be fun for you. I mean, as somebody in the construction industry, you get a cool new app that you can pull up all your plans and look at all the pictures and things like that. This should be something that's going to wow you. And once I think a lot of the guys saw that and they had their first set of plans uploaded, and here, check it out, click, boom, there's that plan, zoom in, layer over that existing plan so you can see the changes. Now they're kind of wowed by it. So I think creating that excitement and letting them know that this is something that's here for you, that we got for you to do your job, to make your job easier and more fun, to get you more vested into the way the tech works with it.
Yeah, I think that's huge, is to answer the question, what's in it for me? Because I don't know about you guys, but I do stuff for my reasons, not for reasons other people give me. And I found that it seems like construction people are kind of obstinate, and you get a lot of type A people who kind of want to do whatever they want. And when they're told what to do, they tend to do the opposite. So yeah, if they can see what's in it for them, then
sometimes a hard head goes past the hard hat.
Yeah, exactly. Great stuff. So let's talk about what are some specific benefits that you guys have experienced since rolling out Fieldwire?
Transparency, communication has been, just the flow of communication, the accessibility to not only, like we mentioned, the current set of plans, the most current files. There's no more digging through, I know I have that file in my email, or maybe it's on the FTP site, or I think we had it saved to a Dropbox. Let me check that. Fieldwire acts as a repository for all of the files, all of the tools that we need from that perspective, I'd say, is for the job to run. So there's no more, lost time or frustration with digging for that file that was somewhere. It's all kind of centrally located. It's always available, again, through the tablet, through their phone. If they're on the computer at home, they want to look something up right away. It's all cloud-based. So the fact that it's always accessible, and also I think that it eliminates a lot of excuses. It allows us to say, hey, you're on the Fieldwire project, whether it's our superintendent, talking with one of our subcontractors. You can't tell me you didn't have the most up-to-date set of plans. You can't tell me you missed this because I know it's on Fieldwire. So again, it's really streamlining the workflow in a way that, I think it's one of the most important things really to come as far as technology goes. Let's say it's since email, as far as the construction industry is concerned, because it's escalated that level of communication and the availability of resources so much.
Yeah, that's huge. There's a book called Team of Teams that I highly recommend. It's basically, in a nutshell, a couple of retired officers who led the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they developed some interesting leadership concepts, one of which is called shared consciousness, which means everybody has access to all the information that they need. And the book is about, hey, here are these concepts that we developed to start winning the war on terror. And interestingly enough, they apply to business as well. So I interviewed one of the co-authors and talked about how those concepts, one of which is shared consciousness, is so important in construction. Everybody needs access to all the information in one place. And that's huge. What about you, Nick? What are some specific benefits that you've seen since you guys rolled out Fieldwire?
Well, you said you have a lot of owners of businesses and things like that who listen to your podcast, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Money.
Money.
It's one thing that there's all these benefits to how you actually do your job, but the bottom line was vastly improved by utilizing Fieldwire. We've had 109 bulletins on one of our projects here, and these are massive plan sheets with architectural MEP, structural, everything that would have costs so much in paper, especially when you get multiple copies. You need it there the next day. Just the time, if anybody's ever done it, to slip sheet multiple sets of documents is just agonizing. It takes so much of your time, and you end up wasting resources that you could otherwise have working on other document control throughout there. So we actually had an intern on site, and then when he went back to school, he was working remotely for us. And he's uploaded almost every set of plans or bulletins or updates over the past year. So we have an intern working remotely at college who's able to help with document control. I mean, if that's not technological improvement, I don't know what is.
Well, to give you an idea of the scale, I mean, slip sheeting is one thing. Nobody likes slip sheeting, but one set of plans for a bid package could exceed 500 pages here, and a bulletin could be 100 of those pages. So that's where a lot of that time, and again, just streamlining and efficiency. Efficiency is kind of the name of the game here. And every way you can make a job more efficient works out not only for us in the field, but as Nick said, as a client owner, you know, if everything's running smoothly and the communication's there, and we're able to lower the amount of time that's spent on menial tasks like slip sheeting, that's going to end up in dollars saved.
And as you imagine, on a renovation project that's constantly changing and overlapping bid packages, the punch list phase of projects was larger, whether it's a true punch list of something that was missed from executing the contract documents, or a wish list item that came up during the walk of, oh, well, okay, now that we see this, we want this added here, that changed to this color, things like that. We were able to use their tasks phase and use different priorities to sort those. And we turned what is meant to almost more be a task tracking portion of Fieldwire into a massive punch list for the whole building, and being able to move those from the different priorities to completed, and then have ultimately the design teams verify these and run these reports. I could run a punch list report every week and be able to hand it out and tag it for different subcontractors or different project managers. And the ability to take data and sort it is always beneficial for you. And just have it in a mold that you can change and update to all of your different ways you want to utilize it it's priceless for that.
I think it's actually one of my favorite kind of, maybe, I don't want to say lesser utilized, but one of the functions that Fieldwire offers, as Nick is saying, with the punch list, with the tasks functionality, is the ability to tag a subcontractor or a specific trade or person, what have you, to a specific punch list item. So like Nick's saying, you know, if we've got a couple hundred punch list items, well, you don't want to give that whole punch list to the plumber because 90% of it's not for him. So we're able through Fieldwire to assign just the plumbing punch list items to the plumbing trade, and then export a report that goes just to the plumber. Or as a subcontractor, he's on Fieldwire with us as part of the project. So he's able to view just his punch list items. So again, just, I keep saying it, but efficiency and streamlining and communication, and it's just, it all comes together to make the job easier.
As I as a project manager myself, project manager, owner's rep, I realized that my job was to be a broker of information. My job was to get the right information to the right people at the right time, at the right level of detail. If I did that, things worked pretty smoothly. So sounds like certainly on a project like that, if you didn't have a good system of brokering information, it would be a nightmare. So
yeah,
great stuff, guys.
You get overloaded.
Oh yeah, it's overwhelming to imagine that amount of information. I don't know how they did it 100 years ago. But great stuff, guys. I want to be good stewards every time. I appreciate you guys taking the time to be on here, talk about your experience on the old post office project and giving us some good advice with rolling out new systems. And it sounds like Fieldwire has been a big win for you guys. So thanks for taking the time to be on here.
Thanks for having us, Todd. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Up next, I had the opportunity to sit down with Yves Freneau, the CEO and founder of Fieldwire. And if you want to avoid big mistakes, when trying to roll out new systems, or you want to learn how to sell upper management or sell the people who hold the purse strings or the decision makers in your company on how to roll out a new system or make that investment, then you're going to get a lot out of this. All right. I'm here with Yves Freneau, who is the founder and CEO of Fieldwire. It's a construction management software company based in San Francisco. We just heard from the guys at Bear Construction before this about their experience with the old Chicago post office and how Fieldwire really was key to managing such a large, complex project. So, Yves, I appreciate you taking time to be on the podcast. How are things going for you today?
Things are going great. The economy is slowly reopening on the West Coast. So thanks for having me, Todd.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this. I always want to help people avoid painful, expensive, and oftentimes, not in this case, but I definitely want to help people avoid extinction level mistakes. So when it comes to mistakes, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see contractors make when they're trying to roll out a new system or specifically a new piece of software?
Well, I think the biggest mistake a contractor can make is to not do their homework. And by that, I mean not test driving a couple tools before making an informed decision. We meet contractors all the time that have gotten locked down into like a 2 to 3 year contract after being sold on some great benefits of a tool, to discover later that it's either just really hard to use or deploy, or they've been trying to deploy it for months and they're still not at the level where they expect it to be. Or sometimes it simply doesn't get the job done. Maybe like the tech is not very robust, or they have too much scale, etc. So now they have to buy another tool. Like often it's going to be a tool like Fieldwire, and still pay for the software that they have a contract for that they don't use anymore. So I think in general that's the biggest mistake. I mean, but buying software in my mind is a little bit like buying a car to commute to work. I may think in my head that driving a classic sports car is the way to go. But in reality, what I really need is a car that starts every morning, just gets me a good mileage on the highway, and I can carry my equipment in the back. And so I think software is no different than that. Just keep it simple, test drive it. If I had to recommend maybe a tiny framework to think about those things, it's three pieces of advice. Number one, is it easy to use, deploy, and adopt? Like there's no point in buying something that your team is not going to use. Number two, is it going to scale to the size of the projects that you're running, or to the size of your company? Many tools look simple at a small scale, but do they work when you try to put them on a big project? That's a big question. And the final thing is, does it work for your company? Does it deliver an ROI that you care about on the core job? And if you can answer those three questions, just time to move forward and just sign a contract. But don't sign a contract before you can prove those things.
So one of the things that I run into, because I help people put systems in place and select software and ultimately eliminate chaos. And what I've seen people do is they say, I have this problem. They're frustrated. There's some symptom that they're dealing with, and they tend to jump to a solution. How would you advise people who have pain and they're frustrated with something in their construction company? How do they really figure out what they need? Because they're going to try out some solution, and they need to have something to check that solution against, a checklist, some sort of measurable objectives. This is what we want, sort of like, to use your analogy, I'm going to go buy a car. What do you really want? Do you need good gas mileage? Do you need seating for 7 people? Do you need 4-wheel drive? Those sorts of things. When people are thinking about assessing a piece of software, how should they go about deciding what they actually need?
That's a good question. I think the first piece is to really go back to the problem itself and try to define the problem accurately. It's important to understand that when talking to individual employees, they might voice symptoms rather than voicing the problem itself. So the first, I think, exercise is to gather what various employees are saying and try to go to the root cause of those symptoms. Once those are clarified, I think writing those problems down and starting to look for solutions that potentially address those problems is the next step. And then we go to the test driving part of the work, which is, this is what I think my problem is. This is what I think a solution could be. If I test drive it, do I see the symptoms go away or do I not? I mean, I think countless times a mistake may have been made on diagnosing the symptoms accurately, or the solution just doesn't fix them.
Great advice. Great advice. I talk a lot about root cause analysis. Don't treat symptoms, actually get to the root cause. And there are plenty of good methods out there. You can Google 5 whys for root cause analysis or fishbone diagrams. Just go through some sort of exercise to get to the root cause. So great advice. One of the other challenges of when it comes to implementing software is there's implementation, there's selection, but then often the people who are dealing with the symptoms are not the people who have budget authority. So they have to go about selling upper management on the idea of changing a process or investing in a new software. What advice would you have for someone who's saying, yes, that's me, our system's terrible, I know we need it, how can I go about selling internally to my leadership on investing in a new piece of software?
So that's a good question, because I think it's a very common problem. I think it's a problem that most people in the field are going to have when they're trying to convince their project manager or their foreman or their company leadership to adopt something. So I would say the simple answer is to do small, inexpensive tests that show some results. And once you show those results to your leadership, usually they're going to ask you to scale that for the entire company. The era that we live in is that the deployment cost of software is extremely low. Developing that software is extremely expensive. It requires a lot of engineers and etc. But the cost of deploying it is actually pretty marginal. And so for us as a SaaS vendor, we're happy we're capable of deploying it for a customer for an extremely low price, for them to prove that it works, makes a case, solves the symptoms that we talked about, and then decide to go on a larger contract. And so most of the time, as you mentioned, when we talk about process or software, we're talking about basically day-to-day execution, like the thing that the craftsmen in the field are faced with. So the most important thing to remember is that upper management is somewhat disconnected from that execution of the company. It's not good or bad. It's just a fact. I mean, I see it at Fieldwire. We're closing in on 100 people. I have far less visibility today into the details of what we do than I used to do when we were a small company. And because the upper management is disconnected from the day-to-day, it's hard for them to make those decisions. And the good upper management knows that. They're not going to try to make a decision without having the information. And so what usually upper management does is they learn to rely on their best people to make those decisions. So yes, the people in the field don't have the money, but upper management doesn't have the info. And so that's where the trade happens, is that if you can bring results to upper management, they will look at it in detail and they will ask you questions and they will try to figure out if that is an initiative that they can scale up to the entire organization, because that is their job. That is what they want to do. And so I would say just push for those cheap deployments, like an initial test, a proof of concept, run it seriously, just document the ROI, try to really think as if you were like a director or like a VP, like what do they care about? And then present those results like that. If it's a good case, they will support it.
Yeah. And I would add to that and say, don't just collect problems, but bring solutions. So bring
100%.
Bring the problem, but then bring the solution, and then bring the data to back up your hypothesis that it's a solution, and then answer the question, hey, what's in it for me? Because ultimately we all make decisions based on what's in it for me. And if you can present something in a way to your manager or your executive management, this is what's in it for you. Customer experience, better margins, lower rework, we're making more money, we're more productive, etc. Make it a no-brainer decision. But you can't just say, hey, this doesn't work, fix it. That typically doesn't go very far. It's not to say that it does. Maybe it doesn't work, but if you want to actually get things solved, bring problems, bring solutions, bring data, put yourself in their shoes, like you were saying. Great advice. So let's talk about Fieldwire. What are some of the biggest problems and challenges and areas of chaos that contractors are facing that Fieldwire is specifically addressing?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that every contractor can relate to, whether they're a general contractor or subcontractor, is that the margins are not getting any higher right now. And that's putting a lot of pressure on the quality and efficiency of project execution. I mean, we have a saying at Fieldwire, which is revenues are made in the office, but margins are made in the field. And so I think that's the core problem we're trying to solve here. So especially right now with a potential recession approaching, we're leaving the very good market that we've had for the last few years. In a bull market, everybody makes money. There is a lot of money on the market. It's about who can win the job rather than who can make money on the job. In a recession, it's quite different. In a recession, you got to make money. You're gonna operate on thin margins, so you need to be able to be accurate on your company performance, and that's what's going to be important. So a great bidding team and a great legal team is what you need in a bull market. A great field team is what you need in a recession, and so that's where we focus on. So in terms of what Fieldwire does in that equation, so we focus on field execution, where you make and lose money on a day-to-day basis. And that day-to-day basis is really important, is that at the end of a given day on site, do you have a sense on whether your execution was at a level where you made money or where you lost money? For a subcontractor, you should know day by day whether you lost or made money on site. And usually that's your progress and how efficiently you've been moving through the schedule. That's a good proxy for that. And so what we help subs do here is just kind of like plan out the detailed work on site very, very accurately, track the progress of a crew as a sub, and just make sure that all the information is up to date, that you're deconflicting efficiently with the other trades. And so deconfliction happens on both sides of the equation, right? You're doing it for your trade versus the other trade, but if you're a GC, you're helping the trades deconflict with each other. It's not direct value for you as a GC, but if you do it well, everybody will have a better project, and that means better margin for you. So, and we do that all the time in real time. Every time someone drops the ball on site, there is money that disappears from the pot, right? And so the problem of construction is that being 90% right sounds like being right a lot, but it's not enough in a market where the best people are 99% right. And so that means that there is another player in the market that can execute with higher margins than you can. And so on the same job, they can outbid you every single time. Or you can win the bid and lose money on the site, which is not desirable at all. So that's what we do. So if you're a GC, we're going to help you interface better with your subs and run better projects and higher margins for you and your subs, meaning that the best subs will want to work for you. If you're a sub, it's just completely direct. We're going to help you run your crew like a championship team, and you're going to make, just much higher margins. You're not going to waste the high quality labor that you've spent so much time hiring and efficiently dispatching to a site. That's where we help.
Great stuff. Yeah, a couple of things I'll add to that. I tell people I managed projects for years, large complex projects, and I realized my job wasn't to build stuff. My job was to be an information broker. So somebody has to get the right information to the right people at the right time, at the right level of detail. And if I did that, things worked pretty smoothly. And then The other thing I would say is for general contractors who are thinking, why would I invest in something like this? Because I assign all my risk to my trade partners and subs. Well, as a project manager, I took care of my subs and trade partners, and they gave me better pricing because they knew my jobs were efficient and they made money on my jobs. And they knew if I created a schedule, we were going to hit that schedule. And I got good service and I got good pricing and I got better quality, and they're more cooperative because I took care of them. So yeah, it's putting it, I'm all about systems and eliminating chaos and eliminating profit bleeds. And I talk a lot about profit bleeds on the podcast. So great stuff. If people want to find out more about Fieldwire and how it might help them, where should they go?
So in the spirit of, test driving things and giving it your own spin, go to fieldwire.com, fieldwire.com. Or you can go on the App Store to download the free version and spend an hour with it. Just form your own opinion and see if you want to do, POC, convince your management and work together later. Feel free to reach out to us.
Great stuff. Well, I appreciate it, Yves. Go to fieldwire.com, take it for a test drive, and you got some good advice here. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd.
Thanks so much for listening to the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. If you could leave a rating or a review, I would greatly appreciate it. That helps get the word out there. And if you could share this podcast with somebody who has a passion for construction and leadership and eliminating chaos, if you could send them an email, send them a text, tell them to check it out. There are over 170 episodes out there right now. So if there's anything I can do for you, go to constructionleadingedge.com. You can schedule a free call with me. If you want to talk about eliminating chaos, maximizing profits in your business, and eliminating the profit bleeds specifically, I would love to help you do that if you're a construction business owner. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thanks so much for listening.